times, for the teachers in the chat, where you're dealing with a child and without the input or buy-in from that parent of the child or caregivers, it could be a grandmother, it could be an aunt, it could be a father, it could be the kid's brother. But without the input and buy-in from them to help facilitate some type of intervention when that child's struggling, you're just not going to get through. You can have as many intervention programs and meetings as you want to sit down and have one-on-ones with that child. But if you don't have the buy-in of the people closest to him, none of it is going to matter. And I think that's what I was talking about with that program, is that we could do those programs till we blue in the face. We could sit and have as many discussions as we want, but without the buy-in of those people to be accountable. And by accountable, I don't mean going it alone. I mean being willing to let in the resources that they need in order to help them with the development of that child. If it is, you know, services, if it is just a voice of reason, if it is somebody to help, you know, but it still requires the buy-in from those caregivers is really what it comes down to, and accountability from those caregivers to do that. And that's really what I'm talking about. I'm not saying that, you know, these households are just, you know, damned if they can't do it on their own. I'm talking about them being accountable for that process.
I'm agreeing with you. You are correct. What I find is many single mothers, especially Black, don't know where the resources are.
Mm-hmm.
In a white community, it in most cases, it comes to you.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
You know, in the Black community, Black women, and, you know, so for the sake of pride, sometimes you just give up because you're trying to find, can I get a little help? And the reality is, I think we live in a society where you get punished for being poor and Black.
To that point,
it's not an excuse, but
right.
for those who want the help to make a better society, it's like it's a struggle to find it.
And that's a good point, because a lot of times they don't know where the help is because there is none.
Exactly.
And
exactly,
because we talk about mass incarceration, we talk about defunding police, we talk about the fact, and what that whole premise is that community resources in Black communities are lacking, but police funding isn't, right? So how do we not just resources from public resources, but even community intervention, I think is more what we're talking about. But I think you still need both. You know, we need to find a way, to your point, white communities have these resources. Those resources in white communities have more funding than their local police departments. It's not the case in most Black communities. You know what I mean?
I think these conversations could help plant the seeds to start those organizations.
Absolutely.
A lot of people are looking at entrepreneurship now, nonprofits. So these could be community-based little setups, like you have Boy Scouts and stuff like that. And once you get it set up, you have the model, and then you can just pass that around from community to community.
And I think the perspective that I come from is, it's not like we didn't have that. You know, when we had the civil rights movement, the Black Panther Party, we've had these in spades. The problem is,
but then the government started funding them, and when they defunded it, it went away.
Is that, you know, that's the whole issue of what systemic racism is. You can have community intervention. We can start up programs, but systemic racism will find ways to either, you know, divert that or interrupt that, I guess is the way to describe it. And so how do you find ways to, because the funding is coming out of our communities.
Right, I think you have to look at what did they do to screw them up, and then what do we have to do in structuring this time around to avoid those same mistakes.
Right.
If it's self-funded, that I think that's where, when we start getting into all the grants that are government reliant, as opposed to working with other corporations that where we spend a lot of money, again, self-funding between us. If we get a little creative so that their hand is not in it and we do retain the control.
And what I'm saying is not so much in opposition of that, but in addition to, right? So what I'm saying is the money for the police department is coming out of your pocket. It's coming out of your business. Whether you want it to or not, it's coming out of your community, right? And so the question I'm posing is, in addition to these programs, should that money be all encompassed in the police department alone, right? When that's not the case in a white community, right? And as much as we can raise and develop grants and programs, we'll never outfund state and local and federal government. We'll never be able to, right? Those grants will always be larger as long as that's the priority is law enforcement as opposed to community outreach and development. So how do we reprioritize this funding that is our money and start, I guess, encouraging our communities to think of it that way instead of this, and I take the approach more so in that to say that, and I think that's a lot in line with, I feel like, in my opinion, where we got lost after the civil rights movement, we started thinking of it as, oh, I need to just do this alone instead of, this money is still being siphoned from you. The money that's being taken out of your schools, it's being taken out of your community, your businesses, your tax dollars, your income tax money, that's your money. So what should it prioritize, your incarceration or your community development?
Then that's going to require more political organization.
Right, right. And that's what I'm saying. I'm not saying that it's one or the other. I'm saying it's both. You need grants, you need these community funded programs, but you also can't neglect the fact that the federal government spending power and priorities superimposed in our communities has a significant generational impact.
Here how we begin to change that.
Right.
Well, if you're not at the table, you are on the menu. Right. That is the situation of the Black community right now. First, we need to, as Black people, we need to sit down and have a conversation. It's badly needed because you can't have 4 people moving in this direction to make improvement and then 10 moving in the opposite direction. Then we're just doing a dance and we're not going anywhere. I've had the benefit of, how I work with different people, Indians, Chinese, white Americans, and blah, blah, blah. And I've become friendly with them. And sometimes we talk or I have dinner with them and I give them permission to tell me what they see when they look at us. And it always comes, the Indian man, he said, the biggest problem I see with your community is you people don't work together. He's correct.
Absolutely.
Before we get to all the federal funding, there are some things we need to take care of first as Black people. And it starts in the home. In the home, that's where it starts. Okay? We have to fix the home, then the home will fix the community will fix the town, and the town will fix the state. That's not a step as Black people we fully understand or we forgot. Because here's the thing, I think most people, and this is what frustrates me at some of these community meetings, most people are still in that mindset that a great leader like a Martin Luther is going to come along and make it all right. And I keep telling people, history goes in cycle. We are past that. The era of the lone Black leader is gone. It ain't coming back. If Black people sit down together and really start to understand that the problems we have affect all of us, we start to develop certain behaviors like we don't have a clue how we spend our money. You ever watch Black people walk into a bodega, stick their credit card in an ATM machine? They don't know who it belongs to, just because they want to get what, $30? So you pay that company and you pay your bank and you pay somebody else to draw money. Those are undisciplined behavior. I think the sister mentioned we throw a sweet 16 party and it's the amount of money that could do a wedding. Why? Or we buy trinkets for our little kids, trinkets that they grow out in months. These madness need to stop. Number 2, we need to start taking care of where we live. When you walk into a Black neighborhood, you can know it's a Black neighborhood. There are just certain things there that are common with Black neighborhood. Dirty streets, don't get me wrong, guys, not every single one, but generally speaking, dirty streets, liquor store, the Chinese food store, blah, 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 all haphazard all over the place. We can start to address these issues at the local level. Because in the end, we have to be up there sitting at the table so that we don't be on the menu. And we have to start train young boys and girls when we see that kind of leadership in them. And the community has to, I don't know, come together and find a way and use, pool what resources we have and help each other. And then before you know it, people say, hey, I want to be a part of this. We're moving in the right direction. You know, we form a nanny pool, for an example. And if you're off, if you're only working 2 days a week, you volunteer one day, you work at the nanny center. So a single mom can drop her baby off and not have to pay God knows awful whatever. Of course, these people have to be certified and, you know, because you don't want to leave your kid with somebody. But these are things we can do right now to start change the dynamics that are in our community. We don't need anybody to come into that. We as people have to sit down and say, hey, we have a problem. And the answer is, you think? So how do we address it? And one by one, you say, here's what I can do, here's what I can do. And we form a bank, and we know who in our community has this skill, whatever, and we start to volunteer some of our skills. And we start to make a difference. But we have to want it, guys. And right now I look at some of us and we just don't care. All we need is something to put in our stomach and a place to lay our head at night. You can't function like that. But that's where some of us are.
The village raised the child mentality, right? That's what you hope for. You hope that when you are at work, someone else is going to look out for your child and help them to grow in the right way, that the teachers that teach them are in some type of partnership with you, that everybody's on the same page and you trust these people to help raise the child, right? And that's what I mean by the community is no longer there, where that's a team effort. There's this great divide amongst all of us. And the reason why I asked everyone to look up their archetype and find out who they are is because we are so much alike. I sat here and listened to everyone pretty much say the same thing, right? The level that they're at, the emotional maturity that they're at, what they would consider themselves to be, the archetypes they consider themselves to be. And we're pretty much all in agreement on these things. Yet we are all so divided when it comes to agreeing on something. We can all agree like that what we don't like is true. But the solution to those problems, the African-American community seem to not be able to agree on that. We can all say we don't like it, but not agree. And I'm saying with all of our archetypes, we're pretty much seeing how very much so our realities are as Black women and as Black men, yet living the same lives, manifesting in different ways, but living the same existence and lacking teamwork just doesn't make any sense to me. You know what I mean? Like, I'm my sister's keeper. She is me and I'm her. You know, she's out there in the world getting scrutinized for the same exact things, with the same stereotypes being put on her. We're going through the same mental struggles of trying to be a woman and a Black woman in the world today, yet we are fighting each other. There is no agreement. So in order to fix these things, I think we really need to look at the things that make us the same, because there's more of that than there is that makes us different. And go from that standpoint and say, wow, you know what? I'm going through the same thing, or I've been there. This is what I did, where you're offering that information and having that community of helping each other get there. So I know we're talking big picture stuff here where we're discussing politics and policies and all of these things, but at the end of the day, you got to start with you're my brother's keeper. Half these people don't even know who their neighbor is. They don't know who their neighbor is. They don't know who lives across the street. They don't know them by name. They don't know. They'll see their kids they don't care. There's no sense of community anymore. And I feel like for us to have change across the board in a mental health way, in a financial way, in a physical way, growing needs to happen collectively and not individually.
My nephew goes to a school in New York City called the Calhoun School. And when he was, I want to say about 5 or 6 years old, I know this is ridiculous, but they had him take a aptitude test to determine if he was a gifted child. And he scored in the top 99 percentile in the city. So they let him go to the school. Now, At the parent-teachers conference, what's the guy's name? Ben Stiller sits next to my sister. What's the guy's name who played Wolverine? Anyway, so there's a lot of actors and famous people and wealthy people that go to the school. The programs that this school offers, from the 4th grade, they were teaching him how to do film. They had them invest in stocks. They provided them stocks, right? They didn't have to pay. They provided them stocks in the school to invest in. They took the kids to China. They taught them Mandarin and they had them practice it in real world business environments. They took them to Mexico. One of his friends is a billionaire. One of his friends' fathers is a billionaire. They take him on vacations in the summertime to Mexico. The experiences that he's had, he's not even in the 11th grade yet. And the experiences and the connections and the resources that he has are invaluable. And I talk to him about this often. That's something that a lot of us, we go to private institutions, private colleges, and spend tens of thousands of dollars in tuition to acquire those types of connections, those types of resources, that type of education. And that was granted to him from the 3rd grade, really. 3rd grade, the 4th grade, the 5th grade, the 6th grade. And we can pull and we can talk about starting these initiatives, but it will never substitute for the level of funding, to her point, that these communities have, right? And so I'm not saying that it's not important to do these things in the community. I'm saying that we have to realize the gap that we have between the ones who have in our communities is astronomically high. And we're not going to reach that by just telling someone, by just focusing on the fact that we invest in frivolous things like designer clothes and things like that. Because guess what? These communities do too. But they can afford to do that because of how wide that gap is between them and us. You know what I mean? We can't. And that's why I say that I think that in lieu of having people in the home being accountable, starting community initiatives, refocusing our attention to local politics. I think all of these things are important. It's not an either or, it's not a this or first, that first thing. It's all of these things, you know what I mean? And you can't neglect one thing while you focus on the other, because that gap will still continue to widen. And eventually it gets to where it's getting to, and the point is that it's getting to a point where we're so far behind that as a community, it's not even it's right now, we don't have enough investments in terms of our net worth as a demographic to really compete with white people, right? We make up 13% of the population. On average, every Black home is worth $17,000. On average, white people make up 60 or 70% of the population, and on average, their net worth is $170,000. That means for every one white person, that's $170,000, which is a net worth of 10 Black homes. So you don't get there by just having people put their 2 cents together to build programs and then hope that we can bridge that gap. You can't do it that way.
Well, okay, so can I say something? I feel like we're not looking at this in that way. I feel like as the Black community, we keep having this conversation, but we keep having this conversation in a reference to white people. I'm saying let's have this conversation based on where you're sitting right now, the race against yourself, right? The race against those in your home. Because if you're looking at it that way, you're absolutely correctly. We're not going to be able to bridge that gap just from that perspective. Right. But for us to effectively create change and let the responsibility of each generation be to contribute to our success, we have to start somewhere in reference to ourselves. What does us as the Black community need to do to be better with each other before we go out there to anyone else, to anything else? The child that we have in our home right now, how do we give him an opportunity to be great in his own community first?
It's like, you know what? And that's the most mind-boggling thing to me, because as a unit, we could do so much, but it's just like, what is the issue? Like, why people don't want to do it and then cry about it? You know what I mean? I need my kid to have this. Oh, we need this and we need that. But when it comes to like gathering people to organize these things or volunteering to have things for these kids, coming out of your pocket to do things, because you have to come out of your pocket. You know what I mean? You have to try to get a grant, but they complain, but they don't make the moves. And then sometimes the Black community is just so divided, and I don't understand like what it is. Like when you said about reparations, I'm like, yeah, they would get that reparation money, and what would they do? Just go buy a whole bunch of pointless shit, excuse my mouth, and then cry again about it. You could have started a whole community center with how much money they say they're supposed to give people, whatever. But I don't understand why community can't come together. Like we all live in the same place, but it's like, what's the right word? It's like acting like you're better than the person. It's like a whole ego.
As a people, we have been through mass trauma and we have had no therapy.
Mm-hmm.
Hence the strange behavior.
Absolutely.
Okay? No therapy. We crawled out of it, and we're fragmented people. So all the stuff you guys are talking about are great, but I come back to what Tashana says. How do we start right where we are? Because Lee, to your point, all those stuff you talk about are really excellent. Every one of them. Here's the problem, Lee. If we go and knock on that door for them to let us in, so we can learn all those things that they do, they're not going to let us in. It is designed, as the sister just pointed out, you go over to a white neighborhood where the schools are, and you're amazed at the resources that are available for those kids, because they want those kids to learn. In the Black community, as one school my son was going to, it looks more like a detention center. That's not by accident, folks.
Nope.
It's designed that way.
Not.
So that's the reality we woke up into. We never had any therapy. We never had any medicine. Nobody sit us down and help us deal with the trauma. So our psyche is fragmented. That is the answer to the person who asks, why is it we Black people can't come together? That is why. Our psyche, after 400 and odd years of pitting us against each other, has been fragmented. And the thing is, that has now moved into the unconscious realm part of your brain. So we're functioning, not realize that we're fragmented, and we think we're okay. That's why we're like that.
There's an excellent book called Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome.
Dr.
That speaks.
What's her name?
Joy Leary?
Joy DeGruy.
Joy
Yes.
DeGruy Leary, yeah. It speaks to that, and it's an amazing work. And I will say we can start by simply speaking what we would like it to look like versus echoing what they keep telling us about ourselves in the negative, that we don't stick together, because by keep echoing it, we're reinforcing it subconsciously. Going back to the rituals, is subconscious, but you're reinforcing that very behavior that we want to change. So I think, again, to stop speaking it into existence and just change the way we speak about each other and to each other. Instead of saying we don't stick together, we're learning to stick together. We're learning to work together. We are working more together. And eventually, it's like you fake it till you make it.
I love that. Thank you. I agree.
Because I find that we'll start blowing the whistle for them. Like we take the cue from them subconsciously. We start promoting that Black men are deadbeat fathers. And we all know several that are not, but we still keep repeating that. We keep repeating the angry Black woman. We know that it's a caricature. We know that it's a stereotype, but we keep saying it until we start to believe it. And we have to take back control of our narrative. And again, until it is factual, we have to speak it into existence with love. Because we can do it. We have done it and we can do it again. And like I said, until we know better, until we do better, until we can, get.
I think a lot of this all starts with having to reprogram the way we think.
Mhm.
We have to get out of this mindset of it's all about me and mine. It's all about what I can do to make my family successful, and really get into the mindset of collective economics and build for ourselves, irregardless of what other cultures and other races are doing for themselves.
And
We
regardless of what they think or say about us.
Correct. Because at the end of the day, we have all of these other communities that are thriving because they do that. They have collective economics. We don't recycle our own money into our own companies, our own Black businesses, the way that other cultures do. And that's one of the biggest problems. We look towards other people to find what we want instead of going to our own communities, helping build our own communities. The Black dollar recycles out of its own community in the blink of an eye, whereas other people, other cultures, they keep that in there for days, weeks, months, because they have this idea of building up their own community and putting the dollar back into their own community. And I think reprogramming from very beginning, even before we get to the point of having these rites of passages, because at that point, a lot of the damage is already done. We have to do it from the very beginning today before we even start bringing in the next generation. So from the very day that they're born, they're surrounded by all that they need to help bring the community back up to a level and continue to push it up to a level where we can say we're proud of the schools that we have in our neighborhood. We're proud of the community centers that we have. But until we have that reprogramming to remove this idea of I, and make it a we effort, I think we're going to be stuck in the same cycle. And we're going to have, like I believe Michael said, we have 4 people who are pushing for this successful idea, but 10 people are pushing us in the other direction. We need all hands on deck to really get to a successful place where we can all thrive as a Black community.
Very well said, my sister. So let me ask you a question. Any idea how do you start? Where would you start? That's what I want to know, because here's the thing. You get up tomorrow morning, you have your job to go to. You have your kids or your family to look after, and you're set in a cycle. You have to catch a bus, take your car in for repair. You have your world going on. All those are great ideas and they're ideal. My question is, where do you start? Fact, most Black people don't like to read. How do you get information across to them? Where do you start? You live in a neighborhood, and like Tashana said, you don't know the person live across from you. You don't know the person live on the other side. So you can't even have a social conversation with them. Where do we start? Because to climb Mount Everest, we have to make one step first. My question to you is, where would you suggest we start before we can start see all those things up in the horizon?
I guess the best way to answer that is to figure out why they are stuck in the I mentality. Because in order to address that, they could have societal trauma that makes them only want to go for themselves. And that goes to the idea of therapy. I feel like so many of us struggle with mental health that we don't acknowledge it and don't seek help for it. And then we're stuck in the cycle of repeating all of the things that led us to a bad point in our life. And I think that would be a great place to start, understanding why won't you change your mindset? Why won't you go out and be more part of the community? Whether it be because someone told you that, no, the community doesn't have anything for you. You have to leave the community behind and only look out for self. I mean, I've always been someone who has been very into helping the community. And that's probably something that was a part of my upbringing. Other people may not have that mindset. So we have to figure out how we can get them to be in a better place with the we mentality instead of the I.
I like that. Here's the thing though. It's hard to tell somebody they're sick when they don't believe you. That's pushing water uphill. I know from dealing with people extensively that we as as a society, as Black people, our psyche is fractured. You have people inside the group who can see what's going on. People like Lee and what's the other brother who was Roderick, who was just making some excellent point. We here on this forum has the ability to step back and see what's really going on. The day-to-day people that I meet in the street and I deal with, you can't have a decent many times I've seen brothers standing on the corner having their usual talk, which is usually politics or sex or whatever. And after listening respectfully for 5 minutes, I try to interject and just change the trajectory of the conversation. One or two things happen. They listen to you politely and wait for you to finish and leave, or they just look bored. I just wonder what the hell you're talking about. You just want to get something in there to say, guys, rather than you talk about, because men in America, for whatever reason, can talk about sports ad nauseum over and over and over till you're sick in the face. And yet we can't sit down and have a decent conversation and say, hey, listen, you know, we have a common problem, you know. Let's pool our mind resources together. The trouble I'm having, Sister Nicole, is that just reaching across the aisle to another brother or sister, it's a rough task. Just to have that conversation before we can even understand that we have a collective problem. And that's the frustration. Great ideas, but where do we start?
Okay, I went on a job interview, and it was asked to me, they need a training program. And he asked, how would you develop this training program? And I'm like, okay, you need a training program, but in order for me to create this training program, I would first meet with the people who the training program is supposed to be geared towards, find out a consensus of their weaknesses, their issues, their, whatever concerns that they may have, so I can go back collectively and do a sound training program targeted towards their weaknesses or their concerns. I have to do that before I can do anything. Now, to coincide that with this is, everybody said, well, okay, how can we do this? How can we do this? The thing is, we have to start by community groups that coming together quarterly, monthly, whatever the case may be, to form a collective agreement, bargaining agreement, to basically tackle these issues on a local level on up. Because unless you get people out of this mindset, especially in New York City, they're addicted to welfare. The welfare mentality is the strongest out of any metropolitan city in the country. It's the strongest in New York City. If they can sit back and sit on their ass and basically collect food stamps and get their rent paid for, they will come out and have like Jordans, and brand new Jordans, and iPhone X that cost $1,500. They will have all of this, but they will have not a clue on how to basically start generational wealth. And if you talk to them about it, it bores the hell out of them. So then, after the main objective of this community meeting would be to reach these people on their level where they can understand it, be beneficial towards them on a monetary level. And once you click with them on a monetary level and see how they can come up in a positive way, then you may begin to crack a layer or two. But you have to start the training. The training has to be where it captivates them and catches their interest, because nobody wants to sit in a training section where you just bored to death. It has no interest to you. You see what I'm saying?
You know what?
That comes back to again and letting people be in their lane. Everybody doesn't have the same interests or concerns.
Right.
So, just start. Let the people who are interested start, and it will organically evolve until it becomes cool to be involved.
Right.
Because those households that you guys speak of, I came from one of them. Whereas, why are you going to college for? Are you gonna go? You're just gonna go to college to fill out. You have your own family attacking your progression because they fear, they want to project their failures onto you.
But that's where the community comes in. Just by coming together for whatever the purpose is, that exposes you to different perspectives, different people. It really just comes down to exposure, so that you have other opinions, other viewpoints. So it's not just dependent on your immediate circle. You widening your circle.
I mean, I think it's kind of what Michael said too. Like you are in a community, right? And you feel like these are the issues, and you feel like other people know what the issues are, that those fundings aren't there, those things aren't there. But the idea for them to do the work, because that's kind of where we don't get it done, right? Where we're all agree, but is everybody going to show up and do it? They expect someone else, this leadership figure, to come in, or someone else is going to do it. Oh, don't worry about that. Somebody else is going to do it. There's no charge taken upon them and responsibility in themselves to say, my community is my responsibility. What we have to offer is my responsibility. What my child knows, who my neighbors are, who sells in this community, right? Who has businesses in here, that's part of my responsibility. They don't feel like that. So you end up having people that live in a place, but they don't feel like they're part of that community. They just live there. They live there.
And I think that's anywhere. I think you're always gonna have that group, like the 80-20 group, when it says 20% of the people do 80% of the work.
That's what we call the hood. You live there.
But I think that's even in a family. You may have two siblings, and one is the dependable one, and one is the one that kicks back because they know the dependable one's gonna do it. So they don't have to. Or maybe that's just not their thing. There's something else that they do well.
Right. So in these different archetypes, right, we're highlighting all these different strengths and weaknesses. And like I said, not everybody can get across this river playing the same boat, playing the same role. So again, but that sense of responsibility, like Lee was saying before, needs to be there, where you're like, this is my charge. It may not be to lead, but my charge may be to do something else, and this is my role, and I'm responsible for that. There's no accountability. So in starting in anything, you're all pretty much saying the same thing. Like, we need to do this collectively, because if we don't, me going this way and you're pulling me back that way, 20 people, and it's me alone going this way, doesn't work. So they're going
to burn out.
Right. And then you're saying, forget it, right? That's going, okay, let's do this. But because you're doing it alone, it's like, okay, forget it. I don't want to do the same.
Here's a couple of ideas. And it was mentioned here already. First is start with conversation. Start becoming aware of the people you have casual conversation with. Because you can tell when you're talking to a conscious person. Mm-hmm. And if this person sounds like a conscious person on the same wavelength of you, make a note of that. They may not live in your community, and you may find out that they have a specialty, let's say, in finances. If I'm talking to a group and who was it, Lee is in finances, I'd want to bring you in and say, can you go and talk to these homeowners here in this community, because they don't even know what refinancing is, and then I can bring that person in. Let us make mental Rolodexes of people we meet and actually ask them if we know that their specialty in certain area. Hey brother, hey sister, can I call on you to talk to just a couple of people in my community, maybe in a living room, who wants to know blah, blah, blah. Why don't we start there? Mm-hmm. And then from there, we can grow into, somebody mentioned earlier, a bi-monthly meeting where we physically get together or virtual like this. And then we start to pool resources, what we have. We have a couple of people in finances. We have a couple of people over here in education. We have people here who do, catering, blah, blah, blah. And then we start to realize what we have before we can get to level where, because I want to know in my community, is there a Black-owned dry cleaner? And I can't find out. I don't know where to go to find information like that.
Right.
And then maybe we can start out of this little group, we can start to do that, and never know. We may just keep adding people as we go along. And we might just start something that actually have some traction on it. How about we start there?
I'm down with that. I think we have amongst us all the tools we need. We just have to know it. Like you said, make those connections.
Yeah, it's funny that Michael says that because ever since I went to college and I really started branching out more and getting to know more people, I started doing that for myself because I'm like, I really want to support my people. So I started taking notes of like, okay, this person I know is a photographer. This person I know is good with finance. This person is good with websites. So I started creating all of these like a mental Rolodex, like you said, of all of these people. And throughout my life, if I ever come upon an opportunity, whether it be for me or someone else, I'm like, you know, I do know somebody who can help you out with that. And I think if we continuously do that in the various sectors and create the opportunity to educate people in our community, we'll change that mindset. We'll rebrand how society has forced us to think off of 400 plus years of struggle.
Yeah, that'll definitely start recirculating that dollar.
Definitely, exactly.
And the collective work. So it can be done, and we will do it. That's the alphas coming out.
I hear you. No, okay, so you guys ponder on that, on where we can start, come up with some great ideas. I know that in the guys group we have mentioned creating a mentorship program, and we're figuring that out. But any ways in which that you guys feel like you can contribute to that, let me know, let us know. You are more than welcome to join, add anyone in. Like I said, it's going to take everyone collectively on the same team, on the same board, but it does start with us individually and going out into the world. So I hope you guys really leave here with everything that has been discussed and everything that we've learned, and just go out there and spread the information, you know, spread the good news, so to speak. Have people take a really deeper look at who they are and where they want to be, and start walking that way and talking that way and doing the things that it's going to take to progress us as a people as much as an individual.